India has shifted from dependency to dominance in global strategy. For decades, India was treated as a follower in world affairs, a nation that waited for orders, instructions, and approvals from more developed powers. The narrative was simple. India was the back office of the world, a service provider, and a market to be exploited, a resource to be tapped. But here's the shocking truth: India no longer accepts this story. It has rewritten it, and in doing so, has done something the United States did not anticipate. It has inverted the relationship of power. When you observe history, the United States always positioned itself as the indispensable nation. Every country had to align with its interests, follow its rules, and dance to its music. But suddenly, India is not dancing. India is composing, and that is terrifying to an empire accustomed to obedience. Think of it this way. In the past, India was a student in the classroom of geopolitics, but now it is the one writing the exam, and the United States finds itself struggling to answer. This dominance is not about tanks, missiles, or aircraft carriers. It is about something far more dangerous: strategy. A nation of 4 billion has realized that sheer size, when paired with discipline, is a form of power that no single nation, not even the U.S., can dismiss. For the first time, America is confronted with a partner it cannot lecture, a partner it cannot punish, a partner it cannot manipulate. India's foreign policy moves in recent years illustrate this brilliantly. It refuses to be a pawn in someone else's chess game. While the West screams about alignment, India remains brutally independent. It trades with rivals, negotiates with adversaries, and partners with competitors, all while holding firm to its own interests. That is dominance. That is what leaves the U.S. stunned. The recognition that India is not begging at the table, but flipping the table entirely. But there's something even more profound here. Dominance in global strategy is not about arrogance, it is about clarity. India knows exactly what it wants: sovereignty, self-respect, and a place at the top of the global order. This clarity terrifies those who thrive on confusion and dependency. For decades, the U.S. mastered the art of keeping nations divided, distracted, and dependent. But India refuses to play that role anymore. It speaks with a steady voice, and that voice cannot be silenced. And here is where the emotional core lies. This shift is not just geopolitical, it is civilizational. For centuries, India was broken, plundered, colonized, and humiliated. Its people were told they were inferior, its culture dismissed as outdated, its future dismissed as irrelevant. But the pain of history has been converted into fuel. India's next move is born out of wounds that refused to heal, out of humiliation that refused to be forgotten. When a nation carries centuries of memory in its bloodstream, it does not rise politely. It rises like a storm. The United States is stunned not because it underestimated India's military or its economy or even its technology. It is stunned because it underestimated India's will, a will that has been forged not in comfort but in struggle. A will that does not bend to pressure because pressure is all it has ever known. When the U.S. looks at India now, it sees a mirror it does not want to face. It sees a nation that has taken the very tools once used against it, globalization, technology, trade, and turned them into weapons of independence. It sees a nation that no longer asks for recognition, but demands it. It sees a billion-strong population that is no longer content to be a market for someone else's products, but determined to create its own empires of innovation. And let me be clear, dominance does not mean hostility. It means independence. It means sovereignty. It means refusing to bow, and when a nation of this scale, this depth, and this hunger refuses to bow, the world must adjust. The United States is stunned because it realizes that the rules of the game are changing, and for once, it is not the one writing them. So the question for you, listening right now, is this. Do you see what's happening, Or are you still trapped in the illusion of the old order? Because history does not wait. India is moving, and it is moving with the ferocity of a civilization reclaiming its rightful place. The world is stunned, the U.S. is stunned, and you, if you are wise, you will not just watch but learn. India has turned its population into the sharpest weapon of innovation. For decades, global elites saw India's population as a burden. Too many mouths to feed, too many bodies crammed into too little space, too much chaos to ever be productive. They mocked the numbers, they dismissed the youth, they reduced 4 billion souls into a problem to be managed. But here is where the shock comes in. India has shattered that lie. What the world called a burden, India has transformed into a weapon. What the world dismissed as noise, India has turned into music, and what the U.S. expected to be a weakness has become an advantage so terrifying that it changes the entire balance of power. Innovation has always been the crown jewel of the United States. Silicon Valley, the great American universities, the frontier spirit of risk-taking, this was the narrative the world consumed. America was the land of breakthroughs, and the rest of the world followed. But now, something unthinkable is happening. India is not following. It is overtaking. Not because of one genius, or one lab, or one company, but because of a collective force so massive it cannot be replicated. 1 billion young minds, restless, hungry, unapologetic, are marching into the future, and unlike in the U.S., where innovation often begins in comfort, in India, it begins in necessity. Necessity is sharper than comfort. Necessity is relentless. It produces solutions that no textbook can teach, no billionaire can buy, and no government can suppress. Think about it. When a young person in Silicon Valley creates an app, it often solves a problem of convenience, ordering food faster, delivering groceries quicker, making payments smoother. But when a young person in India creates an app, it often solves a problem of survival, access to healthcare, access to education, access to money itself in villages where banks do not even exist. These are not toys of luxury, they are tools of transformation, and that difference changes everything. Because when innovation is born from survival, it scales with ferocity. It grips society not as a novelty, but as a lifeline. This is what the United States did not see coming. It thought numbers were irrelevant, that only elite universities and venture capital could drive breakthroughs. But India has revealed the deeper truth: numbers are power. Every problem faced by millions becomes a market. Every challenge multiplied by scale becomes an opportunity. And every solution created in India, if it works for 1 billion, can work for the rest of the planet. That is not a market. It is a revolution. Consider digital payments. The West invented credit cards, payment processors, and complex banking systems. But India bypassed all of it. With UP, a farmer in a rural village with no credit history and no fancy device can pay and receive money instantly. What the United States took decades to build, India leapfrogged in years, and here's the part that leaves the U.S. stunned. It was not achieved by copying the West, but by innovating against its very structure. 1 billion transactions a day. That's not adoption, that's a civilization upgrading in real time. And this is just the beginning. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, renewable energy. India is positioning its population not as passive consumers, but as active creators. In every sector, young innovators are using scale as their laboratory. When a single startup can test its product on tens of millions within weeks, the speed of evolution is unimaginable. This is a weapon sharper than any missile, more powerful than any army, because it fights not for destruction but for creation. And creation is unstoppable, but let's cut deeper. Why does this matter emotionally? Because this is not just economics. It is dignity. For centuries, India's people were seen as cheap labor, background workers, the faceless crowd behind someone else's innovation. But now, the same people are refusing to be background, they are taking center stage. Every coder, every engineer, every entrepreneur in India is part of a civilizational roar. Asterisk, we are not your workers, we are your competitors. Asterisk, and that roar is echoing across the globe. The United States is stunned not because India is rich, it is still fighting poverty. It is stunned because India has weaponized its greatest challenge and turned it into its greatest strength. Poverty forces frugality, frugality forces creativity, and creativity forces innovation. That is why the West is shaken. Because its wealth breeds complacency, while India's struggle breeds ingenuity. And make no mistake, this is not a temporary spike. This is a generational force. India has more young people entering the workforce every year than the entire population of many developed countries. That demographic energy, if directed with clarity and discipline, is not just a wave. It is a tsunami. And no nation, not even the United States, can build a wall high enough to stop it. So here is the raw truth. India's population is not its problem. It is its weapon. A weapon forged in struggle, sharpened by necessity, and unleashed through innovation. And when 1 billion people stop waiting for someone else to invent their future and begin creating it themselves, the world has no choice but to watch in awe. The U.S. is not just stunned, it is frightened, because it knows that for the first time it is not the only architect of tomorrow. India has picked up the pen and it is writing its own script. India has weaponized discipline in the digital economy. And this is not just an economic move, it is a civilizational strike. The United States, for decades, has dominated the digital realm by preaching the gospel of freedom, disruption, and deregulation. It built its Silicon Valley on the idea that rules should come later, that chaos fuels creativity, that anything is justified as long as it scales fast enough. And yes, it worked. The world watched as American giants Google, Facebook, Amazon became gods of the digital age. But here is where the shock comes in. India is not imitating that model. India is disciplining it. India is doing something far more dangerous than building the next Silicon Valley. It is forging a digital empire grounded in order, sovereignty, and control. The U.S. thought digital chaos was strength. India has shown that discipline is stronger. While American companies spent decades mining user data with no accountability, India flipped the script. It told global tech giants, if you want access to our billion-strong market, you follow our rules, not the other way around. Suddenly, the empire of algorithms found itself negotiating with a nation it once dismissed as merely a consumer base. The message was brutal and simple. Asterisk, India is not your colony. India is your regulator. Asterisk, that is not just confidence, it is dominance. Think about Aadhaar, the biometric ID system. Critics mocked it as invasive, unworkable, too ambitious for a chaotic democracy. Yet today, it is the backbone of the world's largest identity infrastructure. 1 billion people can prove who they are with a fingerprint or an iris scan, enabling access to banks, healthcare, and government services. No nation, certainly not the United States, has built anything comparable. This is discipline, order imposed at unimaginable scale, not through coercion but through vision. And when order touches 1 billion lives, it creates a foundation for exponential power. Now consider UPI, the digital payment system. In the U.S., payments remain shackled to banks, cards, and fees that bleed the consumer dry. In India, payments are instant, free, and universal. Why? Because India disciplined the chaos. It built rails for the entire financial system, forcing interoperability, demanding transparency, eliminating friction. What the U.S. leaves to corporations, India centralized as national infrastructure. The result? A society where street vendors, auto drivers, and farmers leapfrog into the digital economy without even touching a bank card. This is not just efficiency. This is a silent revolution. An entire population mobilized by discipline in design. The U.S. is stunned because it cannot replicate this. Its politics is too fragmented, its corporations too powerful, its society too addicted to consumerism to accept national discipline. But India's culture, forged in centuries of collective struggle, understands something deeper. Discipline is not restriction, it is liberation. When rules are applied with clarity, the weak are protected, the strong are challenged, and the entire system moves forward together. That is why India's digital economy is not a playground of billionaires, but a battlefield of empowerment. But let's look beyond the surface. This discipline is not just about building systems. It is about reshaping psychology. Every Indian who taps their phone to transfer money in seconds, every villager who verifies their identity with Aadhaar, every student who accesses education digitally, they are not just using technology, they are absorbing order. They are learning to live inside systems that function, that scale, that deliver. This rewires the very DNA of a nation long accustomed to chaos. It creates citizens who trust that discipline works, and citizens who trust discipline become unstoppable. The emotional power here cannot be ignored. For centuries, India was mocked as disorganized, fragmented, and incapable of structure. Colonizers and critics alike sneered at its chaotic democracy. But today, the same democracy has imposed more digital discipline on its people than any autocracy ever dreamed possible, without stripping away freedom. This is not just governance, this is vindication. 1 billion people who were told they could never organize have organized themselves in the most advanced digital system on Earth. That is not progress, that is revenge against history itself. And here lies the true shock to the United States. India has not only caught up in the digital race, it has written new rules. While America's digital economy is controlled by private monopolies, India's is driven by public platforms. While America lets corporations dictate, India places sovereignty above profit. While America's system enriches the few, India's empowers the many. This inversion terrifies the U.S. because it proves something they never wanted to admit. Discipline beats chaos. Order beats exploitation. 1 billion united beats 1 billion divided. So understand this clearly. India has not just entered the digital age, it has weaponized it. Every transaction, every ID scan, every digital record is a bullet in the arsenal of sovereignty. Every disciplined structure is a shield against foreign dominance. And every citizen empowered by these systems becomes a soldier in the silent army of progress. The U.S. is stunned because it realizes that discipline, when scaled, creates something far more potent than disruption. It creates inevitability. And India has become inevitable, not through war, not through conquest, but through the quiet, relentless power of digital discipline. So ask yourself, are you awake to what this means? Because India's next move is not coming, it has already begun. The stunned silence of the U.S. is proof. The world is watching and history is turning. India has chosen order over chaos, discipline over indulgence, and sovereignty over servitude. And that choice has left the most powerful nation on earth frozen in shock. India has transformed soft power into hard power leverage. And this, right here, is the move that nobody expected. For decades, India's soft power was treated like a sideshow. Its spirituality, its yoga, its Bollywood, its cuisine, things that entertained the world but didn't influence it. The United States saw soft power as its exclusive domain, weaponizing Hollywood, pop culture, and media to project an image of dominance. India, it was the exotic flavor, the colorful background, the soundtrack to someone else's empire, but the world has changed. And India has done something unthinkable. It has taken its soft power, sharpened it into a spear, and thrust it into the heart of global influence. The U.S. is stunned because the things it once dismissed as harmless symbols are now levers of geopolitical power. Let's start with culture. For years, Bollywood songs, Indian spirituality, and cuisine were consumed as novelties. But something deeper was happening beneath the surface. Every yoga studio in New York, every meditation retreat in California, every Indian restaurant in Europe, they were not just selling culture, they were embedding India into daily life. Millions of people across the world were unknowingly absorbing Indian values, balance, resilience, collective harmony, and spiritual strength. And when soft power penetrates minds, it becomes harder to erase than any law or policy. Culture doesn't ask permission, it seeps into the subconscious. This is India's genius. Its soft power doesn't knock on the door, it lives inside the house. Now, here is the shock. India has moved from influence to leverage. When millions of global citizens already admire, practice, and consume elements of Indian culture, the world cannot ignore India's voice. It's no longer just food and film, it's credibility. When India speaks on sustainability, it isn't just another government statement. It is backed by yoga's philosophy of harmony with nature. When India builds digital platforms, they're not just economic tools, they carry the credibility of a culture that has taught discipline for millennia. That credibility is leverage, and that leverage has teeth. Look at the global stage. While the U.S. struggles to sell its model of democracy in regions scarred by intervention, India speaks with authenticity. Why? Because India's soft power is not manufactured, it is civilizational. It doesn't come from propaganda, it comes from lived tradition. And that authenticity gives it weight. A Bollywood blockbuster reaching Africa or the Middle East is not just entertainment, it's cultural diplomacy binding people emotionally to India. A yoga retreat in Europe is not just wellness, it's a doorway to Indian philosophy. A billion-dollar IT deal is not just business, it's backed by the trust that Indian professionals have built worldwide. The U.S. is stunned because it has realized India's soft power has turned into hard currency, but the real emotional depth lies in this. Soft power was once India's only power. During centuries of colonization, when its armies were crushed and its wealth stolen, India still influenced the world through ideas. Zero in mathematics, Ayurveda in medicine, philosophy in spirituality. Now, in the 21st century, that very soft power has been reborn. But this time, it is paired with economic and technological muscle. The result is lethal. Ideas backed by strength become commands, narratives backed by numbers become strategies, and culture backed by confidence becomes law. This is why the United States is stunned. It is used to nations imitating its culture, begging for its approval, consuming its media. But now, its own youth are bending into yoga poses, practicing meditation, learning Indian philosophies of mental health, chanting Sanskrit mantras. It is used to exporting its way of life, but it finds itself importing India's, and in that inversion lies the shock. Because influence is no longer one way, it is two-way, and the flow toward India is accelerating. And let's cut even deeper. India's diaspora, the millions living abroad, are not just immigrants anymore. They are cultural ambassadors. CEO of American tech giants, doctors in European hospitals, engineers in Silicon Valley, they are not just individuals, they are bridges. Every Indian face in leadership amplifies India's soft power, converting it into authority. The U.S. cannot compete with this because this is not lobbying, this is identity, an identity that cannot be bought, bribed, or silenced. Now imagine the impact when soft power fuses with hard decisions, when India stands firm on global issues, climate change, technology, sovereignty, peacekeeping. It doesn't stand alone. It stands with the invisible army of cultural influence it has built worldwide. That is why nations listen. That is why the U.S. is stunned. Because for the first time, India is not knocking politely on the door of power. It is walking through it, surrounded by billions who already carry its culture in their minds and bodies. Understand this clearly. Soft power without strength is just charm. but soft power with strength is dominance. And India has reached that threshold. Every yoga pose practiced in America, every Bollywood song played at a European wedding, every Indian origin CEO leading a multinational, these are not random events. These are the invisible chains of influence that India has forged, and now they are being pulled together into a single rope of leverage. So here is the brutal truth. India's next move was not to abandon its soft power, but to weaponize it. To make the world realize that culture is not just entertainment, it is strategy, and when a civilization as old as India turns culture into a sword, even the mightiest nation feels the cut. The U.S. is stunned not because India copied its methods, but because India did the opposite. It turned what was once dismissed as weakness into the deadliest strength. And that is the lesson: never underestimate the quiet power of culture, because when culture matures into leverage, it does not knock nations down with bombs, it reshapes them from within. India has made its move, the U.S. is still reeling, and history is shifting, silently but irreversibly, toward a civilization that has learned how to turn soft power into hard destiny. India has rewritten the global rules of resilience, and this, my friends, is the ultimate shock. For centuries, resilience was seen as a passive quality, the ability to endure, to absorb punishment, to keep standing even when knocked down. The world admired resilience as suffering with dignity, nothing more, but India has redefined it. It has shown that resilience is not just survival, it is strategy. It is not weakness, it is weaponry. And this realization has left the United States staring at something it never thought it would see: a civilization that cannot be broken, only sharpened by pressure. Look at history. Few nations have carried the scars India has carried. Colonized for 200 years, plundered of wealth, stripped of dignity, divided by violence, told again and again that it was too weak, too poor, and too chaotic to ever rise. Any other country might have collapsed under that weight, but India did not collapse, it absorbed. It carried humiliation, it carried pain, and it carried hunger. And instead of dying under the weight of those chains, it learned how to turn them into fuel. That is the difference. Resilience in the Indian context does not mean standing still. It means rising higher precisely because of the fall. The United States is stunned because it has always defined power as comfort. Power meant wealth, stability, dominance without struggle. But India's resilience is built in the fire of struggle itself. When the U.S. faces crisis, financial crashes, political divisions, wars, it shakes. It questions itself, it fragments. But when India faces crisis, pandemics, poverty, disasters, it adapts, it reorganizes, it tightens its grip on survival. Where the U.S. sees breakdown, India sees training. Every setback is not an end, it is rehearsal, and a civilization that sees suffering as rehearsal cannot be defeated. Take the pandemic as an example. The world mocked India in the beginning, predicting collapse under its scale, chaos under its population. But what happened? India not only endured, it produced one of the largest vaccine drives in human history, supplying not just itself but nations across the globe. That is not survival, that is resilience turned into leadership, and the U.S. could not ignore it, because while it hoarded, India distributed. While it panicked, India produced. While it complained, India delivered. Resilience became not a defense mechanism, but an offensive strategy. But let's go deeper. Resilience is not just about systems. It's about psychology. The Indian psyche has been trained for centuries to expect obstacles, to expect that nothing will be handed over easily. This expectation does not weaken, it strengthens. Because if you expect the storm, you build your house differently. You tie your foundation deeper. You prepare for turbulence, not for comfort. And that is why India thrives where others crumble. When the power goes out, life continues. When supply chains break, alternatives emerge. When the world says impossible, India shrugs and adapts. That is not chaos. That is resilience operationalized. And here is the emotional blow. India's resilience is not cold, mechanical endurance. It is carried with hope. Unlike the cynicism of many developed nations, India's people hold an unshakable belief that tomorrow can be better. That belief, when fused with resilience, becomes unstoppable, because when you cannot be broken externally and you refuse to break internally, you become untouchable. This is the shock. The U.S. built its empire on military might, economic dominance, and cultural influence. But India is building something the U.S. cannot replicate: indestructibility. Think of it this way. The U.S. can be challenged by recession, by debt, by political division, by external enemies, but India, it has already lived through worse. Its very existence is proof of resilience. No empire destroyed it. No famine erased it. No colonizer buried it. It survived all of them, and now it is thriving. That is why the rules have changed. The world is no longer about who has the most weapons or who controls the most media. The world is about who can endure the longest, who can adapt the fastest, who can rise after being pushed down again and again. And by that measure, India is rewriting the script. The U.S. is stunned because it realizes it cannot out resilient India. You can outspend, you can outgun, you can outshout, but you cannot outlast a civilization that has trained itself for centuries in the art of enduring. That is why resilience is no longer passive, it is power. It is the foundation on which India is building technology, economy, strategy, and culture. And when resilience becomes strategy, no empire, however mighty, can dominate forever. So here is the raw truth. Resilience is not the absence of pain. It is the refusal to be defined by pain. It is not just getting back up after being knocked down. It is getting back up stronger, smarter, and hungrier. India has proven this again and again, and now the world must adjust. The rules of power have shifted. The United States, once the unchallenged architect of global order, is left stunned because resilience has become the new currency of dominance, and India holds more of it than anyone else. India's next move is not just military or economic or digital. Its next move is existential. It has declared to the world that nothing can break it. And a nation that cannot be broken cannot be stopped. That is why the U.S. is stunned. That is why the world is watching. And that is why history is no longer a Western story. It is an Indian story in the making.